marketing. And I'm so happy to have you join us. And we've got a lovely guest speaker slash special guest, Peter Piche, with us today. Peter, we're so excited to have you here. You've got such a great perspective on Montessori in general, but also a really good background story of how you found Montessori.
Hmm.
So Peter and I were chatting really quick before we went live here just to kind of get to know each other a little bit more, but also, figure out how we're going to do this and how this conversation is going to go. So
Hmm.
Peter, again, thank you for joining us
Yeah,
and having you here.
you're welcome. I'm super excited to
Awesome.
be here. It's fun.
Yes, perfect, perfect, perfect. We've got Emily live here, so Emily, feel free to chime in. I will watch the chat for you, Peter,
Great.
and I might have some questions kind of come in from our guests as we go.
Great.
So awesome. So the main topic that we're going to talk about today is the sales process. And
Hmm.
as I was chatting with Peter here, you were mentioning that it can be a dirty word, right, in the
Hmm.
Montessori world.
Hmm.
So can you speak a little bit to that and kind of why you feel that way and how we can kind of shift maybe our perspective on the sales process?
Well, I love that question for a lot of reasons because I think at heart, um, we're all salespeople, though many of us are um, loath to experience that word in the way that it's intended because so many of us have actually had bad experiences where we feel like we're being sold something that we actually don't want, and it's a very coercive experience. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, because we've all had those experiences in our lives, I think that when it comes time for all of us to step into this game, and I do refer to it as a game, it's a little bit of a game. You have to have that attitude that life and our work is not something can be lost or won, just only played. You sort of have to have that excitement feeling, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
when it comes down to sales and us selling our programs, now if we're all really smart, what happens is we engage Nito marketing to get people in the door, right? And then the second aspect of once we have people in the door, what next? And a lot of us have systems, right? And I encourage us to think of instead of the word sales, if that feels like a difficult word for you, in the classroom, what we're all taught to do as Montessorians is to make an invitation, make an offering to the children, right? We're not supposed to sell the children, right? Or Montessori's famous word was entice, right? And I was always intrigued by the language that she used around this idea of people don't necessarily know what they don't know. And unless they're explicitly presented with something or even implicitly presented with something of value, they may not ever discover its value, right? And so a lot of us are in this mode of, well, when we get people in the door, what's our first idea of what we're supposed to do with them? And the idea is a tour, right? Is it a tour? A lot of us think of it as a tour. I think of it as a talk, right? And it we have to think really deliberately about what it is that we want to demonstrate, not only about why Montessori is so great, because we're all Montessori schools, and so we know at base level what makes Montessori great. But then what's the unique thing that our school does in context such
Mm-hmm.
that people would choose us on purpose, right? So I start to think of an offering that we're making and to not be bashful about the idea, to be confident about this offer we're making because some people will take it, some people will want it. As I said, some people won't, and that's okay. But you can rest assured, some people are always waiting for you to reveal the something that they don't yet know that they need, that they really do need.
Mm, interesting. What a great perspective, right? So and it's really about relationship building, right? And I know that
Mhm,
you're going to talk about that because that's a lot of the work that you do, right? Is you're working with schools, administrators, teachers,
mhm,
guides, just helping them build that relationship with those
mhm,
prospective families that are
mhm,
truly looking for a place that feels like home.
Mhm.
especially for their children, right? You want to be able to trust the people that are
Right.
taking care of your children.
Right.
So do you have any tips, along the way, if you bring in somebody from a tour, what are some of those gems that kind of spark something in the person that's, touring to
Mm.
connect them to your school and to you really? Because you're, if you're the one doing the
Yeah.
tours, you're giving them that impression
Yeah.
of your school.
Well, I think, um, ahead of time, it's really important to think through thematically what is it that we want to present to people and to do something that I call priming, right? So we get people in a tour. Sometimes we do conduct tours that are just one family at a time. And sometimes we schedule tours that are multiple families that we're taking, that our staff knows that we're going to be bringing folks around at a preset time. And I
Mm,
think it's always helpful, and a lot of folks do this already automatically, is they realize that what they want to do is present some things about what people are going to see to really set the container, right? And draw their attention ahead of time. So, what sorts of things might those be? Like for people who are experiencing the Montessori setting for the first time, that might be you'll notice, right? I love using this word, you'll notice. You'll notice that children are not all working on the same thing at the same time. And you just lay that out there, right? Several things that you'll have people notice that are unique either about your environment, about Montessori in general, or something that folks will be, touched by in their heart by walking around your environment. You want to preset those ahead of time in a talk or if you have a PowerPoint and you want to show something that brands your school and has these things, you do that, and then you take folks on the tour. So you've allowed them, you've primed them, right, to be able to see this thing that they might not have experienced before in other settings and something that's probably unique to you. And you walk them around, and by and large, what you want to do while you're doing that walking around is actually, to your point about engagement and relationship building, is I find that a lot of people with this touring tend to talk and really guide the experience themselves. What you want to know and what you want to pick up is ask questions of the people as they're touring so that you can hear pieces of their story and their interpretation of what's going on rather than being at the head of defining everything for everyone, right? And I'm always thinking, how can we Montessoriize this process? Well, you wouldn't in your own classroom take the children, right, to every material that you thought they were ready for and go through the presentation lock, stock, and barrel. I've seen beginning teachers do this, of course, because they're still learning it themselves. But at a certain point, it's time to watch for when the children want to take over. And anytime you think that this process around watch for when the children want to take over, that this is just about children, watch for when the adults want to take over. They
mhm.
will if you allow them to. And that means not filling up all the space, right? So you
Sure.
don't want to always fill up all the space such that there's no space for them to give you their impressions and talk about what they're seeing and have intentional pauses in between when you go into classrooms or experience certain parts of the school where you say simply, so tell me what you noticed,
Mhm.
so that they get to relay their experience. And from there, they feel like their experience is validated, no matter what it is, right?
Right.
And so already you're building relationships with these folks, right? Already you're building some credibility. Already you're building this trust that they're being paid attention to by the approach that you're taking.
Right. Oh, I love that. You must have been a Montessori guide.
I was for 20 years, 20, about 18 years. So at
Sure.
different levels,
Right. Right.
early
So this,
childhood, elementary, and then I was in the adolescent space for 8 years, and that was a fun ride.
right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so awesome. And it's so important, right? So I think as admissions directors, heads of schools, we spend so much time thinking about, you know, what we can portray to our prospects, what
Hmm.
kind of information we want to pass on to them. But if we take a step back and look at how our classrooms are run and what our
Mhm.
guides are doing, the idea of taking that process and giving that experience to a parent
Mhm.
is amazing, like mind blowing. That's awesome. What a great way to look at it, right? Because as parents, they're coming in your door, they're interested in your school and what you do, and if you give them an experience that feels, tailored to who they are and that you see them, I mean, that's like 90% of your sale right there,
Yeah.
right? You
Well, let's
know, you
talk about that. Let's talk
yeah.
about the idea of what percentage, and most people do it backwards, I would say. And I just want to refer just quickly to my notes that and some of the notes that I took because I wanted to talk about this idea of percentage, right? So a lot of us talk about what we're going to deliver when we're making this offer, this invitation to folks. And I'm going to heretofore call it an offer. We don't have to call it a sale anymore. It's an offer, right? We're making an offering, right? And so this idea of we focus a lot on how we're going to deliver this service and all the things that people are going to get, right?
Mhm.
And that's really a head focused orientation. And a lot of people can't hold all those details in their head, although they'll be interested and they'll probably ask questions from the way that you direct that process. But I'm going to argue that we need to focus less on what the service is and how we're going to deliver it and focus more on the outcomes of
Mm.
what they're going to get from a relationship with you. And what's the main outcome? Well, we already touched on it. Montessori is a life changing process, period. It will not only impact your child, it will impact the way that you parent, it will impact your entire sphere of influence, it will impact how the grandparents in your life view your children, it will impact the whole thing. So, what is the outcome from choosing, right, to put your child in a Montessori setting? Making that choice consciously, the outcomes are what we want to focus on. We want to talk about how it's really going to shift everything in their lives. And we already know those pieces. And we want to focus on those because that's where the heart of the offer comes from. It's not about all the things that we're going to do. Those things are secondary. In fact, 10% of that, right, is the
Mhm.
service delivery. 90% of it is the outcomes of what people are going to receive from this relationship, this Montessori setting, this Montessori decision they're making to be with you and to come
Sure.
to your school.
Right. Right. So, Peter, taking that thought of 90% relationship and
Mhm,
10%, more about what you're offering and the
mhm,
outcomes, which I'm so happy you put it that way because that speaks to us, right? We're looking at the outcomes, and we oftentimes are talking about what your child is going to experience when they graduate from my program, whether it's a primary program, elementary, adolescent,
mhm,
however your school is expanded out to. Can you walk us through what the process would look like from
mhm.
start to finish for someone, touring, given, focusing on outcomes versus kind of a product?
Yeah, yeah, I can. I mean, it's really basic, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, our goal, and I'm noticing that there is a question in the chat, and I want to put that in. And our goal is that we want to set the container at the beginning, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
do want to say to people what our expectations are for the tour, and we want to ask them to notice things, and we want to educate them a little bit about the Montessori environment in terms of how we carry ourselves within it, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we don't want to be in this space around, well, if we're in a classroom, um, the idea of work time is supposed to be uninterrupted. And so approaching a child who is in concentration and interrupting that would be a no-no. And we want to be able to articulate that in a appreciative way about how we carry ourselves in a Montessori environment. So that's important too. But then we go on our tour and we draw attention to or we allow people to have the experience of a Montessori environment and then have intentional pauses in between stops on the tour about asking folks about their impressions and what they're seeing so far. And then, frankly, at the end of a tour, uh, it's a missed opportunity if we're not making an explicit offer for folks to apply, right? And usually, I've seen it a bunch of different ways, but oftentimes we give people application packets. Some people may fill them out there. Uh, some people may want to take them home, to think about it. A lot of us are in relationships. You'll probably get people who are coming as a couple, of all sorts, shapes and sizes. We get people, guardians, parents, all that sort of thing. And because they're in a relationship, they sometimes like to confer with one another outside of the context of where
Mhm.
we're in. But I would like to offer this idea that when we make an offer, it's okay for us to create some tension. And what I mean by that is tension is different than coercion, right? Tension is this idea that you've just made an offer to someone of something that they know they want. And they're on this side looking at something that's attractive over here, but they still have to break through the inertia of making a decision, right? And a lot of us are uh, afraid to take a step when we see something that we really want because why? Well, maybe we haven't surveyed all the other products that are out there, all the other experiences that I could sign my child up for. So I'm afraid to take this step right now because, I haven't seen the 20 other schools I need to tour, right?
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
maybe it's just that I see it and you know, it's just that human element of not wanting to make a quick decision, right? And
Mhm.
so, on purpose, what I like to do is make an offer that is an exclusive for that particular moment in time by using what we call a limiter, right?
Mhm.
Which is a technique in sales. And I'm going to say it's a technique, it is a technique. But if it's offered from the space of heart space, of this is really sincere, it's not just something I'm applying to you, but this is really sincere because you want to fill the seats in your school, then there's nothing wrong with it. And what I mean by a limiter is uh, something along the lines of if people apply and put their application fee down today, then they get XYZ for doing that, right?
Mhm.
Or we have space for X amount of people, right, to take advantage of the spaces we have available, and then they get some sort of incentive for making that decision, right?
Mhm.
So that's a way that I like to structure offers in general so that people who want what we're offering will move through the tension and the doubt that we all experience and just get what they need.
Mhm. Emily says it sounds familiar, so I wonder if you guys have had this conversation before.
We might
Um,
have had this conversation.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
For sure. And with that hesitation, right? If we again look at the sales process, that
Mhm.
hesitation right there is kind of our opportunity, right? It's our
Mhm.
opportunity to really, again, rely on that relationship we've already built, but then be that stepping stone for them so that they can
Yeah.
truly make that decision.
Yeah.
And I think as Montessori school, what was that?
They need to say yes, right? Say yes to themselves so that
Right.
the children in their lives can have transformation and they will be having transformation. That's how we have to think of Montessori and what we have created in Montessori schools. We have created an opportunity, and I'm big on this. I believe that Montessori is the one education that has the ability to truly change the world. It's not about like this idea. I wrote an article once for that I was a little upset with fathers, right? So the reason why I was upset with fathers is because fathers I found were by and large, as the children aged in the Montessori school, finally saying we need to take our children out because they need to get tougher for the real world. And being a Montessori dad, I was like, what? I mean, my experience is my own children were in Montessori settings until they were in went through the 8th grade that in a program that I designed, and I was like, this isn't about joining the real world, because if you're happy with the state of the world that it is as it presents itself now, well, Montessori has a chance for you and for your young people to experience what it would be like to have the adaptability and the wherewithal to create the new world they need.
Mm. Well, Peter, that's a sales pitch right there. We should just quote you on that. That was beautifully said.
Thanks.
Would you mind sharing that article? I think maybe some of our members would enjoy seeing that and reading it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share that with you. It appeared in the parent section of Montessori Life with the AMS at one point. It's called "There's No Such Thing as the Real World," and it's a riff on a John Mayer song. And the reason why is because both my kids are musical, and one of the last musical things they ever did together before they went off their own ways in college is they played a duet of John Mayer's "No Such Thing." And
Mhm.
the lyrics really hit me for the first time, right? There's no such thing as a real world, just a lie. We've got to rise above.
Mhm. That's
Um, so it really, and I'm feeling the chills in my bones right now around this idea of the status quo. And eventually, as children get older, we all feel this nervousness around wanting to join it, right? We want our kids to be in it so that they can participate in the world as it is. And I feel like I always say to parents, if you can, if you're able, keep your children in Montessori as long as possible, because really it gives them the best chance to be agents of change in the world that we need.
That's right. Because they're experiencing real world in the classrooms, right?
Hmm.
They're building those skills of figuring out how to compromise, how to do
Hmm.
conflict resolution,
Yeah.
how to, especially in elementary and adolescence as well, but going out into the community and participating in those things. So,
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely. We speak the same language. So Peter, going back to again, helping parents understand what our programs are and feeling our programs. Do you think that there are some things that we can do prior to bringing somebody in for a tour that maybe makes the process a little bit easier and maybe more honed in on that relationship versus, the practicalities of like, here's our tuition rate and here's what our programs require. We're a 5-day program, and
Mm.
are there things that can be done prior to them coming into the door that helps?
That's a great question. Not something that I feel as equipped to answer. I would actually, and especially if the scene was on the call, I'd be asking you two, like,
Mhm.
so what do you think?
Well, we have ideas, but I'm curious to hear your
You have
your
ideas.
insight.
I mean, what's interesting is that we live in a world where engagement at the present moment seems a lot about engagement through screens. And it is tricky to me to figure out a way that builds um, the kind of connection that happens, or to attempt to build it, that happens in proximity with one another, right?
Mhm.
So I'm a big fan of Montessori schools getting out in their communities outside of Montessori contexts. And if you're a school leader, to make a commitment to yourself despite your busy schedule, right? Because the idea is, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, it makes all other things easy or irrelevant, right? The focus
Mhm.
question, right?
Sure.
And so it forces us to prioritize, where are we going to have impact? And to me, still the magic of the Montessori experience from the school leader perspective is them meeting me, and the way that you are the face and the energy, right, of the school. And people need to see you outside of the school bringing that too, right? And so on purpose, I would choose some places where your ideal clients are going to be hanging out, right? Instead of always relying on them to come to you and experiencing you, ask yourself, where are my ideal clients hanging out? And schools should not aim to enroll anybody, because if you think we'll enroll anybody, anybody will show up, right?
Mhm.
And that's
Mhm.
not to say that we want to be discriminatory or filter people out, or but what we want to do is look for ideal fit, right? Because we want folks who are going to partner with us. And when we show up, that our energy is augmented by the relationship, not depleted by the relationship,
Mhm.
right? And
Right.
so we want to be able to get out into our communities because that's where we can have impact. And I would choose one or two places where you can give. I'm a big fan of the idea of giving talks, right? To talk about the issues that are relevant in our communities. People are thirsty. They are dying with under an avalanche of information, right, about parenting, right? And you can find anything to support. It's funny. You can find any information to support your present worldview, right, on parenting.
Mhm.
But we have to think, though, there are probably some really optimal ways to approach this puzzle that we call parenting. So, thinking about how can I go into our community and find a place where maybe my ideal clients might show up or be participate in some sort of event, and how can I be of some service in that space? So think about inside and outside. Not only are you bringing people in, and how can you engage them in small ways, as you said, through the work that Nido Marketing does, through the screen medium to engage them and build some sort of good relationship. I know you guys have lots of ideas, and that's really out of my zone. My zone is more transformational. If you're in front of me, I know how to work with you, right? But then
Mhm.
the outside part is I want folks to go outside, choose one or two niche places where they're doing a service by bringing Montessori into the greater marketplace. That's how I
Mhm.
feel.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree with you. To get out there in the community is there's no comparison. You know, like Nido Marketing offers a lot of really great resources that helps make you competitive because
Mhm,
this is a competitive space. You
mhm,
know, the education, especially early childhood, it's competitive, and there are some really good players in the game. So
mhm,
you know, we need to kind of step up our game, and that's partly why Nido Marketing is here.
mhm.
But there's this other element of being in the community and being visible and connecting with people. And
Yeah.
also, I went to an event a couple months ago for a school, and it was a childcare type of event, and there was a lot. You know, there were a lot of players there, and
Mhm,
it was busy. It was
mhm,
super busy, and I just brought a plant and a tablecloth. And
mhm,
I stood out there, and you would be surprised the look on people's faces when they would come to the table and just
mhm,
talk. You know, there
mhm,
weren't the bells and whistles that you see all the time. You know, it was just like,
mhm,
let me tell you about this very simple approach to,
mhm,
you know, child development and how we support and
mhm.
what we know about them. And that's where those relationships can be built and then built upon, you know, after that. But getting out in the community, man, that's yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, and I hope you had an offer
Yo,
because
totally. We had people coming. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I'm not really good at that yet. So
okay,
you're
you
you're
have an
I'm gonna
offer
take your
because
tip.
when you take the time, I want to talk about doing the heavy lifting for our rivals. Here's
Mhm.
something, right? So
Yes.
when you take the time to set a container and do a beautiful thing and allow people to just be people and have this interface with you, and you do that, we miss an opportunity if we don't have a bookend that is an offer. Let me tell you why.
Mhm.
They will go away from that conversation they had with you feeling good, and then somebody who's really good at the offer, you may have done the heavy lifting for them,
Right. You've prepared them for somebody else.
potentially.
Right. Right.
So we may do a disservice to ourselves and the beautiful thing we've engineered if we don't always have some sort of offer that follows a few specific rules, which is let me focus on outcomes, not my service delivery. Let me backwards engineer that, and let me have this time bound limiter that says, for our conversation today, if you're interested in XYZ, I have
Mhm.
space for this many folks who are ready to take advantage of this today.
Sure.
That sort of thing.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. Swinging it back around. So we've got, you know, a few minutes left, and I know Emily said that she goes to the local food pantry and the
Mhm,
benevolent center. She says, "You sure weren't in sales for the last? Are you sure you weren't in sales for the last 20 years, Peter?"
I wasn't. The truth is, I haven't had that much experience in sales. I did, at one point, I was the business manager for a group of four guys who we were going around doing singing in four-part harmony all around southwestern Ontario, and it was my job to book us into events and things. I was sort of the fast talker, and so that's really the extent of my sales. Other than I made a point of when I was the program director for this adolescent program that I ran in Durham, North Carolina. I made a point to make it personal because it's really hard to keep people invested in Montessori as their children age. And I found through that painful experience of people wanting to leave for the status quo, and the potential that my program could could constrict and contract to being shut down, that I really needed to grow outside of my comfort zone and figure out how to leverage my strengths and be real personal. Got to the point where I was hand delivering application packets, even though I wasn't the admissions director, to folks, and building relationships that way. So
Mhm.
that's how I
Well, and that's
learned the
really what
ropes.
it is, right? It's about that's the sales process. It's building relationships. And
Mhm.
once you get that, I feel like that's the majority of your work right there.
Yeah, so true.
Right. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining our call. As we were talking, I'm like, there's so many other things that we could touch on, other than
Yeah.
the sales process.
Mhm.
So would you ever be willing to come back, say in a few months, and talk about a different topic?
Sure, I'd love to do that. And what would be interesting is to find out more about what you feel like your community needs. And I'm also just this sort of nerdy research hound. I love to just go find out what people need, and then I have this strength of being able to synthesize it and be able to give it back to people in a way that they can really grasp onto it and make it work for them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would love to create a course that brings you through the process you're describing, you know,
Mhm.
and it would be great to have you be a part of those courses because you are pretty
Yeah,
phenomenal in walking us through it. So
thank
awesome.
you. Thank you.
And Emily says thank you. She's so happy to see, the person behind the emails and phone calls. Good to see you,
Mhm.
Emily. But we're so happy that you're here. And again, we host these every Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, 1:30 Eastern time. Again, thank you, Peter, for joining us.
You're welcome.
All right. Take care.